Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Authors on the Air. I'm James Luttrell, your host, and this is part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. And we're here today to talk with Eric Beetner. And Eric, if you haven't met him yet or read his work, he's a guy you really have to check out. He's got a style that's really unique, and I really like it. He's got over 30 novels under his belt, about 100 plus short stories. He's been nominated for, I think, three Anthony's, a Thriller Award, a Shamus Award, a Derringer Award, 7 Emmys to his credit. I mean, the guy has some work under his belt that you need to check out. We're going to talk to him today about his latest work, of the last few miles of road. Here's a shot of that snazzy cover for it. And Eric, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Good to see you, Jim.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Good to see you too. Yeah, I don't. I mean, we live in the same state, but I don't get to see you unless it's virtually or at a conference somewhere. So this is kind of a treat.
Yeah, California is, I think people think, oh, you all live in California, but when
Yep.
you're, northern and southern, it's you might as well be 3 states away.
Yeah, people don't understand that at all, and it's kind of fun to hear them say, "Oh, you have earthquakes." Well, no, that's Eric has earthquakes. I have
Yeah.
fires up in Northern California. Yeah, so yeah. But yeah, the book. I mean, I really like the book. It's such a unique premise. And
Thank
why
you.
don't you tell folks a little bit about the book?
Well, it's about a man named Carter McCoy who is in his 70s, and no spoilers. This is page 1, chapter 1. He gets diagnosed with a terminal illness, so he knows his time is limited on this earth. And this sort of sparks in him the need to do something that he feels like he should have done a long time ago, and that is to kill the man responsible for his daughter's death. And Carter, he's lived a good life. He's not a criminal. He's been a good boy all his years. But with the clock ticking the way it is, this need for vengeance sort of bubbles up, and he wants to take care of this to sort of balance the cosmic scales, if you will. And so I really wanted to explore someone who is not a criminal taking on this criminal act to do something that we all know is immoral, of killing someone, but he can sort of self-justify it in his way of, that this person never got the justice he feels that he deserved for the death of his daughter. And, I thought it was such an interesting dichotomy for me of having someone turn to a criminal life in the last moments of his life, and then complications arise, of course, and he realizes that there's a certain freedom to being a short timer, and he can actually use that freedom to help others in this way. So it ended up being, started kind of with this character and with this moral dilemma, and then kind of spun out to that, and it made him into a bit of a heroic figure, if that's not overreaching. I don't know.
I don't think it is, because I was trying to think about it. He's not really an anti-hero. He's got a reason for what he's doing. He's got his own moral compass that might be bent a little bit, but
Yeah.
he's following that. Yeah, and it was really kind of a unique having somebody who's not a criminal, dive off into that lifestyle and all the bumps that come along with learning that path, kind of spring up on him, which I thought was pretty cool too.
Yeah.
Now, Carter is such a unique character, older guy diagnosed with a terminal illness. Where did the idea come from for that kind of a lead character in your book?
I like writing older characters. I like the perspective. I mean, look, I think that they're underserved in fiction, both in novels and movies and TV. And it's really easy to have an older character just serve that purpose of, someone who is going to be there just to be a tragic loss, or to just sort of pop in and be some sage mystic voice of wisdom that they can give the lead character. And so I feel like they're underutilized in that sense. So when you have someone who has all of this life experience that they can bring to the story, I think that's interesting. So I definitely have written older characters before, and I like that they get to a point, and the characters that I write anyway have gotten to a point in life where you don't care anymore, and you can let a lot of that other stuff go so that they can do some things that are unexpected, maybe for the reader, which I think is also a lot of fun for a reader to see an older guy all of a sudden, he's kicking some ass, or he's doing something that is not what you normally see. And having this sort of unique perspective that's very different. It's a very different character if all of a sudden I made Carter in his 20s. If it's avenging the death of his parent or something, that's a whole different book.
Yeah, it is. I mean, this is very personal. He's been going over this loss for years, and he finally decides to do something about it.
Yeah.
Now, you've got an older character, and it's not in the vein that you see in some of the stories that are out there on Geezer Lit. That it's just
Right.
a guy living in a retirement home. But this guy is a really fully fleshed, character in that world. And what I like about your work, Eric, is your character development is just, it's off the charts. I mean, you dive into Carter, and within those first few pages, a lot about him. I mean, what his motivations are and where he came from and why he's going this direction. And even the book, I think it was last year's book, There and Back Again. Is that
There and Back?
the title?
Yeah.
There and Back. That was kind of like a Hunger Games meets a corporate retreat, and my God, you dove right into those characters, and it's like this whole ensemble cast, but you knew who they were and what they were about. Not everybody can do that. How do you go about creating characters like Carter and that gang in the other book?
Well, as you know from your work, which I could say the same thing about you. I mean, I think it all starts with character. I think that it's easy for us to come up with plots, and you get a spark of an idea, and sometimes it turns out to be a scene, or sometimes it turns out to be, maybe it's just a short story. Like if you're thinking about, well, this happens and then this happens, that's not a novel. That's not a fully fleshed story. It's really got to be about the characters. And it's like, okay, who is in this situation? And now what can I do to them that will start the story rolling? And what complications can I put in their way? And then how does that person deal with it? Because you can have the same plot of a story, because we've all, like famously, everyone says there's only 7 plots in the world or whatever. And you read a lot of books, and if it's a PI story or if it's a police procedural, you're talking about the same basic structure. You're having someone has a goal to achieve, there's obstacles in their way. So what makes that story unique, and what I think readers can identify with, is how does that particular person whose eyes you're putting this book through, how are they going to deal with those complications? So it really does come down to character first, plot second. For me, and I'm sure it's probably the same for you. Any writer who's worth their salt, it really does have to come down to character. And everyone's favorite series characters, we all identify them with, like, oh, did you pick up the latest Reacher book or the latest V.I. Warshawski book? It's like you're literally identifying the series by the character. It's not the plot. It's not. So that is really top of mind when I'm deciding what to write next. And I have a whole notebook full of half-baked ideas that I sort of like, oh, this is great, I'm going to do this. And then I realize, like, I don't know who these people are. I've got a killer plot, but until I figure out who to plug into that, it doesn't have the legs to go into a full novel.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly the same way. For me, it's all about character, and I've found that readers tend to be a little forgiving if there's a character they can really get immersed in and grab onto. They'll forgive a plot hole or two. They're invested in that character.
Yeah.
So it's
and like you say, I mean, someone like Carter, like if he's functioning on his own moral compass, he can do things that the reader doesn't necessarily agree with or wouldn't do in their real life. And you know, you don't have to agree with and be in lockstep with your character 100% of the time, as long as they have their own justifications, their own reasoning, and their own internal logic of the story that they're following. Then that's someone that a reader can relate to, even when they're doing unrelatable things, I feel.
Yeah. Without giving too much away in the book, I mean, Carter meets a young girl who kind of
Mhm.
influences his life a lot, and the book is kind of like, you know, life is going really bad for Carter, and then it just gets worse. I mean, it really has kind of an Elmore Leonard feel to it,
Thank you.
and it kind of had that impression while I was reading it. I was like, you know, he's channeling some big mojo here in this book. Um, but I mean, how did you figure that dynamic out with the girl, and then just where this story went from that?
Well, you know, Carter he's a bit of a loner. He lives by himself. You know, his daughter and his wife have both passed away, and it did present a little bit of a problem, because I didn't want to just be only in his head. I like dialogue. I like characters interacting with each other. And again, just as I'm thinking of, okay, he's going to go after this guy and decides to kill him. That's maybe not 300 pages worth for me. I like stuff tight. I like it. I like things
Yeah.
compact. So to take it out of like, well, maybe this is a good short story. Maybe this is a novella. Again, okay, what other complications can I throw in his way? And if I'm going to pair him with somebody else, well, why not go the opposite way and give him a girl who's, you know, on the cusp of her 20s, and he can see a little bit of his daughter in her. He can not relate to her one-on-one across the generations, but there's a lot of things that he sees in Bree, and like I sort of alluded to earlier, that he can help this girl and he can help give her the life that his daughter never had the chance to live. So that to me was a really interesting dynamic. As soon as I was like, well, why don't I throw someone young at him, and he has to help her, but he's reluctantly helping. So, you know, there's a lot of smaller complications. She's got to sort of put a little bit of pressure on him to get him to do these things. And because I didn't want to have someone who had never killed anybody, and then his first taste of blood, now he's a killing machine. You know, I didn't want a death
Yeah.
wish. That's not interesting to me. So I think having Carter, and you know, this is the first of a trilogy, so I'm deep into the second book now, and it's this constant push and pull of like, well, I want to have a big action scene here. I want him to go after somebody who is a terrible, terrible person, but I don't want him to be gleeful about it. I don't want him to be,
Right.
you know, all of a sudden he's this expert assassin. That's not Carter, and that was
No.
just never who he would become, even after doing this maybe multiple times. So
Yeah.
that
It didn't come across as like a Reacher meets Philadelphia. You know, it didn't
right.
come across. You know, he does have this need for vengeance. He's quelled that a little bit, and now he's kind of in this environment where, you know, like you said, he's not got a lot to lose here, and you know, he's out there. Um, Now, you mentioned that this is a trilogy, and I was going to ask about that. Where can you tell us a little bit about where Carter's going next?
Yeah, you know, obviously not a lot of time has passed between books because he doesn't have a lot of time left, and you know, so he's dealing with the fallout of what happened in book one, and the, look, again, without spoiling anything, the last chapter of Last Few Miles is absolutely, you know, there's another book coming.
Yeah.
I plant the seeds, so those seeds come to fruition in book two, and he is learning to deal with kind of this new life that he has of being in service to other people who need his particular skills. And but again, the thing that's interesting to me is it's not his set of skills as this expert assassin. It's his set of skills as someone who can do this. And if he gets caught, if it doesn't go well, if the worst thing that can happen to him is he gets arrested, and by the time he goes through a trial and is off to prison, he's probably already gone.
Right.
So it gives him almost this little superpower of like, okay, you need help? Well, I'm the guy. Don't put your life at risk. I'm going to put my whole life at risk. And if I get killed in the process, 6 1, half dozen of the other. If they try to send me to prison, good luck on them. So
yeah. Without giving, and you touched on it, without giving too much away, there's one of the lines in the last part of the book. It's, Carter says, "I've got nothing left but time."
Yeah.
So, I mean, that one just kind of hit me, and it's like, okay, this is going to be good. So I'm glad to hear that there are more Carter stories coming our way. So that's going to be fun.
Yeah, I'm into sort of the last push on the sequel, and this is when it's getting good. It's complications arise. It's very complicated in the back half of this book.
Good. Now, speaking of complicated, I mean, you've got another life that you lead in the television world.
Yes,
and you've been involved in that for years. How does that experience influence you as a crime fiction author?
Well, I'm an editor by trade, so my whole world is quite literally cut to the chase, and my whole day is story and structure and efficient storytelling. Because whether I cut mostly unscripted content, I've cut a lot of scripted content, and in both cases, it's about efficient storytelling. It's about communicating to an audience in the most succinct way possible. And that absolutely translates into my writing. I was trained, for lack of a better word, I mean, I took a couple of screenwriting courses, but my sort of first act of my writing life was writing screenplays. And, I didn't study formally that much, other than going to film school and maybe I think I took 2 screenwriting classes there. But just the act of how many films and TV that I watch and study very closely and really break down. So my writing school, both in screenplays and novels, has just been watching and reading. I'm not an MFA guy, but I love deciphering story structure and saying, oh, this really worked for me. This didn't. What can I learn from the thing that didn't work? Right. And why didn't this work for me? So I think both that the efficiency of storytelling that you need to do on screen, whether it's, you're cutting for TV and you literally have a clock to hit because the hour is over and time for the next show, or, if you're doing a feature film or something, you chances are the studio doesn't want you to put out a 3.5 hour film unless you're Scorsese. So that style of storytelling absolutely drives most of what I do. And the biggest compliment I can get on a book is when someone calls it cinematic. I say, great, I did my job.
Yep. And I was thinking that both with the last book and this one, I could just visualize exactly scene by scene what was going on. It was great.
Perfect.
So we're gonna finish up with something I call 3 quick hits, and it's 3 quick questions in your character's head, in Carter's head. Oh. What's Carter's favorite cocktail? What does he drink?
I think he is. He's just a nice cold beer on a summer afternoon. I think he's not a fancy guy. He lives in the Midwest. He's got simple tastes. So I think if he's sitting on the back porch with his trusty dog Chester, and he's got a nice cold one by his side, he's a happy man.
Yeah, and Chester's a great character too.
And Chester's back. Have faith.
Good.
The dog will always live in my books.
Good to know. Okay, second question is, what's Carter's favorite music? What does he listen to?
It's interesting. This was one of the first times that I've written a character who plays guitar like I do. I'm kind of a recovering musician, and I had to give him stuff that was that I felt like was his generation and that he would be interested in, even if it's not necessarily my style. So when he picks up his guitar, he automatically goes to play maybe some James Taylor, kind of folky 60s, 70s folk rock kind of stuff. He's probably a big Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young guy. I think that's his wheelhouse purely from a generational standpoint.
I think that fits. Yeah. With what? Yeah. And finally, what's Carter's greatest fear?
His greatest fear is leaving this earth with things undone. I think that motivates a lot of what happens in book one. And then when, as he meets these other people who need his help, and he takes on the responsibility of helping these other people, even though his help is taken out a couple of people, leaving that undone and leaving somebody else to suffer in the way that he has had to in his life, that motivates a lot of what he does.
Yeah, and that completely fits with what I read. Folks, we've been talking with Eric Beetner, the author of Last Few Miles of Road, and you're going to want to check this out. It's a really cool story, and you've heard a little bit behind the scenes here, and I think you're going to enjoy this. And Eric's, treasure trove of stuff he's got behind him there. So definitely check it out. Eric, thanks for coming on today.
No, thanks for having me.
All right, you take care.
All right.